obligations and requirements that Indonesian products must meet in order to be eligible for export?
Well, the first thing is to convince an importer or buyer in the EU. So people focus very much on standards, and obviously standards are very important. But marketing, the image, the brand, that needs to be built up through different mechanisms. But we have full confidence that the Indonesian business people will be able to take advantage of these new opportunities.
How is the EU helping Indonesian coffee farmers comply without overburdening them?
We have these EU and member states funding, so it's valid for palm oil, but also for coffee, for rubber, for coconut, cocoa. So we have a number of actions that helps farmers, growers of these commodities, and coffee is one of them. Coffee's value has increased quite significantly over the last 10 years. Indonesian coffee is of high quality. So there's a huge potential for Indonesia's coffee to expand its market of the EU. Because Indonesia's trade with the EU is very good for Indonesia. It's one of its largest trade surplus, the third or the fourth. But in terms of taking full advantage of the EU market, it is way below the potential. So although Indonesia is the first country in the ASEAN and represents almost 40%, the EU trades more with Singapore or with Vietnam or with Thailand than with Indonesia. So Indonesia can catch up, and one area where Indonesia can catch up a lot is coffee, because although it is the fourth or third larger producer and exporter in the world, depending on the year, it is only like the seventh or eighth or ninth supplier of EU, and EU is the biggest coffee importer in the world. So there's really a lot of possibilities to sell higher value coffee into the EU. So there's a lot of misunderstandings about the EU deforestation regulation. The EU deforestation regulation asks for two things: legality and traceability. Traceability is not so complicated. It's about having an app in your phone and going around the plantation. So the phone registers what we call the polygon, so the surface area of your plantation. And then this data is put in the documentation for exports. And then the importer in Europe will make sure that comparing with map from 2020 onwards, this doesn't come from deforestation. And since 2018, deforestation in Indonesia has been low compared to other countries that have massive forests. So most of the production in Indonesia is, according to the EU deforestation regulation, has a high probability of not coming from deforested area after 2020. And this is why Indonesia is classified in the EU deforestation regulation as a standard risk. It's not a high risk. So it will be on par with other producers of commodities, such as Malaysia, for example. So they are in standard risk. The other element beside traceability is legality, proving that the exploitation is legal according to the Indonesian legal order. So it's about having a title deed or a number of information showing that this is legal. So we call it a board of information. So there it's more for the Indonesian state to make sure that people who grow commodities have the deed or the information needed. For that, you need a bit of transparency and administrative capacity. But what is for sure is that those smallholders which are connected to larger companies that export coffee of a certain category and certain level, well, they will work with this exporter to make sure that consultants and administrative offices can help them with both traceability and legality.
Beyond commodities like coffee, how do you see the CEPA impacting other major sectors? For instance, fisheries, wood, and we're going to talk a bit about palm oil, which are also vital to Indonesia's export economy.
So, for example, for timber, Indonesia is the main country, or perhaps the only country, that has fully certified the FLECT certification. So timber from Indonesia is certified. So there, CEPA will offer 0% tariff, but in terms of certification, it's already there. So it doesn't affect that much. But obviously the wood becomes, the timber becomes more competitive with a better tariff for Indonesia. For fisheries product, obviously 0% is very important, especially since other competitors for fish product in the region benefit already from 0%, like Vietnam or countries that are who have a GSP, General System of Preference. So Indonesia will be able to catch up with those countries that have already preferential access to the EU market. The only caveat is about phytosanitary issues. So are the products healthy enough for the market? And you will have seen that there were some problems with US markets and shrimps. So we have to make sure that Indonesian producers of shrimp or fishermen have high level of phytosanitary measures. For other products like palm oil, the 0% tariff from day one, which is which is rare in free trade agreement. So 0% tariff applies from day one, and that will allow for a better market access for palm oil products to the EU.
What sectors in Indonesia are the highest priority for European investors in the next 5 years?
One that is crucial is the critical raw material. Indonesia has the largest reserves of nickel in the world, but also is a very important producer of cobalt and others. At the moment, there's not so many European investments in nickel industry, but it is certainly something that we would like to expand. Otherwise, obviously, lots of our companies are already there and trying to develop their presence in the Indonesian market, one of the largest in the world. So European companies of mass products such as L'Oreal or others, they will try to expand their footprint. Many of their products are manufactured within Indonesia, so it would bring more employment. And then in terms of market access and investment, we are looking at machinery, chemicals, and automotive sector as possible areas for bigger investment in Indonesia and hopefully a better market access.
I want to ask a bit of question about that Polygon app that you mentioned earlier to check for deforestation. How soon can we access that app?
No. This is for the producers. It's a tool that it's not a one specific app. It's a tool that they can purchase, but it's not very expensive. And then they need to learn how to use it. But there are special consultants that can explain that, or the growers can try to familiarize themselves. But this is a very specific area. It's not for the large public to have the app. It's for the producers to be able to transfer the data regarding the surface area that they've used for their crops.
So in order for them to have their plantation assessed, they have to go to a special consultant.
They can try to do it themselves, but it's easier with a consultant or with some support and assistance. So the EU and the member states are financing a lot of pilot projects so that some farmers learn how to do it. And then after, this can be reproduced and scaled up either through cooperatives or through the Indonesian government or through companies. For example, in palm oil, mills are owned often by state-owned companies, large plantations. So these companies can help the small farmers in acquiring the skills necessary to use that application.
But we can only access that application probably next year after.
No. Things are being done now, and they've been prepared for a number of years. No, it's not for next year. Next year is the start of the implementation of the regulation for large companies, and then with a 6-month delay for smaller ones. So people have still time to prepare, but the preparation has started years ago.
If, let's say, a couple of business person want to have their plantation assessed, Whom should they contact?
Or they know the address. I'm not going to advertise one or
Ah,
a specific company, but they know how.
right. And once the agreement is ratified and enters into force, what measurable milestones will the EU use to evaluate success of the partnership?
But in terms of milestone, you have to know that the EU-Indonesia relations take place not in a vacuum, but on the basis of an institutional and international agreement called the PCA, Partnership and Cooperation Agreement, which was signed in 2014. Indonesia was the first in the ASEAN to have such an agreement signed with the EU. And this agreement foresees a number of institutional meetings at very high level. So we have a joint committee, we have a political dialogue, we have a working group on trade. So all these institutional meetings that take place once a year will be used as, if you want, milestone to examine the progress in CEPA. Now, in terms of benchmarks, what you're looking at is if the value of the trade will increase, and also the volume, because sometimes the commodities price swings, so you may have a lower price but a higher volume. And then the composition of the trade. Will there be more downstream products from Indonesia to EU? So these are the kind of elements you're going to look at in order to see if the CEPA has been a success. But if we compare with the next, comparable country, Vietnam, in the case of EU-Vietnam, it has been a big success, and Vietnam exports to the EU have grown exponentially.